Hello and welcome to The Intersection. We're the podcast where marketing, sales, operations, and technology stop working in silos and start driving real growth for building materials brands. I'm Megan Kacvinsky, CEO of Point to Point. We're a sales and marketing agency helping mid-market building materials manufacturers build the marketing engine and sales culture they've never had and always wanted. Each episode, I'm joined by Steve Coffey, Senior Managing Partner of Coffey & Co., a growth and strategy firm focused in building materials, and Denine Harper, founder of DHX Consulting and a fractional CMO for, you guessed it, building materials brands. We're here to close the gaps between marketing and sales, strategy and operations, technology and execution, because in those gaps, you bleed margin, and we're going to show you how to stop it. No fluff, just what works. Hello, and welcome to this episode of The Intersection. I am one of your co-hosts. I'm Megan Kacvinsky. I am the CEO of Point to Point. We are a sales and marketing firm built for mid-market specified product manufacturers. And I am joined today by my esteemed co-host, Denine Harper. Denine is a revenue growth officer and fractional CMO of DHX Consulting. And Steve Coffey is the co-founder of Coffey & Co. Today, we're going to talk about fractional CMO, agencies, consultants. As mid-market building product manufacturers think more about the role of marketing and how they fill that void, because we all know there is that void within the organization, they're constantly trying to evaluate, what do I need, or how do I get started, or what's the right solution for me? And the language and the world of what exists to support them can be somewhat confusing. So Denine is going to take us through and help us break down, what is a fractional CMO and when do you need them? What is an agency? When do you need them? What is a consultant? When do you need them? And then there might be some other words that we throw in there too. So Denine, it's all yours. Take us away.
Thanks, Megan. Yeah, at first, a lot of companies, they've identified the fact that they need someone, but they're really not sure exactly what they need. And that's really the first thing that we need to think about. What is that underlying issue? What is the problem that they're trying to solve? And how do you determine, do you need an advisor? Do you need a consultant, an agency, or a fractional executive? So that's what we're going to go through today. And there's really 4 pillars or 4 key things that you need to think about when you're trying to decide which kind of resource you need. The first is really diagnosing the issue. Do you need a full-time person? Is there enough workload? The second is determining which of those models really is going to work best for the goal that you're trying to set out for yourself. And then exactly what is a fractional versus an agency? Because a lot of people think of these things slightly different. If you ask 5 different people in a room what a fractional executive is, you'd get 5 different answers. So hopefully we're going to solve that for you today. And last but not least, all of these different resources, they're all complementary. They work together. We all have specific goals and things that we specialize in that make us right fit for certain situations. But whenever you choose one, there's always a way that you can connect the dots with the other. Sometimes you only need one of them. Sometimes you need 2. Sometimes you need someone to come in to help you decide what exactly they are. So I thought we'd kick this off by really going into what are those things that you really need to think about when you are looking at hiring someone in.
I love it. Oh. And, I think between the 3 of us, we all have such unique perspectives, right? So I have the agency and we do like outsourced marketing leadership. You are a fractional CMO and a revenue growth advisor. And, those are different words. And then Steve offers a lot of data and technology consulting with a marketing bent to it, but also gets into operations, and all these things are the reason why the intersection exists, because it's all so intertwined, so sometimes it's not even like, do I need marketing, but like, do I need data or technology, and where does all this fit? So we all have a different perspective. And even though we have some overlap between what we do, we also have an understanding of like different perspectives and different roles within the industry. So I'm excited about the conversation.
And we work together and collaborate on a regular basis for a lot of our different clients. And that makes all of us stronger.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think I even saw an article the other day where the CEO of an AI company had put on her post in 2021 or 2022 on LinkedIn, the amount of people that had fractional in their title, in their bio or something else, was like 2,000. And then by this past June of 2026, it had grown to, I think, 110,000 people had the term fractional. So it's a more ubiquitous term nowadays. And I think organizations are talking about it. Enterprise level organizations, mid-level organizations, regardless of the size of the C-suite, are discussing, should we bring on fractional work? And helping them understand that, I think, is really important in how to make the decision. Should we, what is fractional work? How do we look at it as an organization? And then how do we bring it into the company and into the solutioning? So I'm excited about this, Denine.
That's a really good point, Steve, because what I've seen over the last couple of years since I started my own business and became a fractional CMO is that a fractional is, regardless of discipline, is meant to be an executive leader. They are meant to work with the executive team of an organization and align their discipline with the business goals and help lead the team under them. And what you're seeing now is a lot of different people calling themselves fractional when they're in between positioning, they're freelancing, what have you. So hopefully today we can really break down exactly what that fractional is. But before we do that, let's get back to the first pillar, which is how does a company decide? What are those key things that they need to start to look at? And how do they dig in enough to really say, okay, I think an agency is appropriate here, or I really need to bring in a fractional? Megan, from an agency perspective, how do you take that?
So as an agency, there's like 5 things that we look for when we are evaluating right fit for a client. And I don't want to give away all my secrets, but one of them is there a true marketing leader that is not the CEO who is able to give direction to a marketing agency? Because you have to have the right person in place to know what you're asking an agency to do. And honestly, Denine, in mid-market building materials, a lot of times we were finding that answer was no. And that's why we developed our AEC strategy and even started offering outsourced marketing leadership or fractional CMO services, because the CEO, we had all these engagements where a CEO would ask us to do something like update my website, run a paid media campaign, and they thought they were giving us the right direction. But then we would do the work and they'd be like, well, it didn't get to what I wanted to do. And why didn't you tell me I wasn't doing the right thing? Isn't this your area of expertise? And it's like, well, but we don't understand your full business, especially when we're first getting started with you. And we didn't fully understand what, the full why behind what you were doing. And so it was constantly leading to a point where even though maybe we were doing good work, that the client still wasn't happy because they weren't an informed buyer and they didn't know what it meant to manage an agency relationship, right? So that to me is, if you don't have someone internally that is not the CEO, that does have some marketing background to lead the relationship, you are not ready for an agency. You need a fractional CMO or a consultant to come in and play a role to help you be ready. That's my initial take on that.
I would agree with that. And I see that a lot of times. I have leaders come to me and they say, hey, my sales isn't working, or my marketing's not working, or my website's not working. And they look at a fractional CMO as, oh, well, your job is to come in and just say, okay, I'm going to fix your marketing. But really what my job would be would to come in and find out across the board what's really broken. How do we align all of those different disciplines so that I could go to an agency and give them the real direction that they need? That's really the job. It's defining the strategic disciplines and setting up the execution of that particular department so that when working with any kind of vendor, you get clear direction.
Well, Denine, real quick, I'm thinking about a conversation I've been having with a prospect, and it is the CEO, and I'm trying to convince him that he needs to do an AEC strategy engagement, but he wants to hire me to create social media content. But he also says his current message is so complicated to understand in the market that only him and one of his senior salespeople can deliver it, and it's like, they're not ready for an agency, like they need help crafting, and I'm like, you can do all that. You can move to execution first, but I just don't think it's going to work. I can't be a part of that. Right. And learning to say no to some of that stuff that comes to an agency too is, I think, important for any agency listeners that we might have. If they're not ready, don't let them get started, help train the client. Right.
Well, to that, point of starting with the need, I guess what I've seen a lot of is that companies at a C-suite level, typically starting, with the CEO, unless it's a departmental conversation, right? Unless, the VP of sales is coming to you and say, hey, I need this, or the VP of marketing is coming and say, hey, I need you for this specifically. If it's more of a C-suite discussion, I find that most companies, as they look at fractional work, is they are misdiagnosing organizational problems perhaps as functional problems. And I guess what I mean by that is they'll come to you and they'll say, hey, we need more leads, right? And so they're focusing on top of funnel, and they're not able to see the level of friction that exists, especially within the building material space, right? As you go through specification and all these different elements of how a lead turns into revenue. And so they'll go and say, hey, come into our organization and produce more top of funnel leads. To your point exactly, Megan, I need social content, just push out social content. Mm-hmm. And so they're looking at the functional nature of it. They'll say, hey, especially to us, hey, we need a CRM, or we need this component. And that may not actually be the real issue. Those are just symptoms. Those are, surface level symptoms of our CRM. We don't like it, right? And that actually could be an accountability problem with your existing leadership. It could actually be a strategy problem, or a capability problem. It's not really maybe a technology problem. And so they want to get a new CRM. They're going to have the exact same issues, and that's going to cause a lot of frustration if you are the fractional leader, right, tasked with bringing in a new CRM. So I think it's important in the initial conversations is to ensure that who you're talking to sitting in the fractional seat, that the leadership team or whatever department head you're talking to really understands what are you, how far have you come in this conversation? Have you actually talked about the pain and the situations that are underneath this surface level problem that you're asking me to come in and solve? So I think that's a really good point, Megan. And just in talking about that first pillar, Denine, that's a lot of what I see is I'll oftentimes we have to go back and say, we've got a lot more to talk about before we talk about your functional problem here. I think that's very important for any fractional person to have at the outset. It's very important for a leadership group to understand we know precisely what we need this person to come in and do. And it's more strategy than it is just switch out the software with a new one, right?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think what it really comes down to, if you're a CEO or even, an executive leader and you're looking to bring someone in, a good way to think about it is, do I need advice? You would bring in a consultant or an advisor at that point. Do you need strategy? Then maybe a fractional is your best. And, or do you need execution? And if you need the execution, it's probably better to start looking at an agency. If you need multiples of that, then it's really like a timeline of what do you need first to get to the next stage, to get to the next stage. And sometimes that is just asking someone quickly, bringing in a consultant to maybe diagnose the problem, and then you can start bringing in additional resources like fractionals and agencies and things like that.
Yeah, I agree, Denine. And I think a lot of times the fractional CMO needs to come in to give form and function to like what that ask is, right? So you need some advice maybe from a consultant about org structure, investment level, or overall organizational readiness, some of the stuff that Steve was talking about, like can your business even handle more lead flow? Are you optimized to go out and to generate an incremental volume from a production capacity or from a team and staffing capacity? If yes, then go get a fractional CMO to get form and function to what it is and let them hire the agency, right? Because if any good strategist, any good C-suite level person is going to want to make sure that it's their vision and their team, right? And so you want to make sure that you do, my advice would be fractional first, agency second, so that they get to make the decisions about what gets done and how it gets done.
So let's start to break down really what are the differences. I mean, we talked a little bit about it, but let's kind of like get into the nitty gritty. So if you're bringing on a consultant or advisor, it's typically a project-based. You have a problem that you want to solve or an opportunity that you want to go after. There's a timeline around it. It's kind of like what it is in a box. Or if that problem that you need to solve, you're not quite sure what it is, you need that little nudge. When you're looking at a fractional, on the other hand, a fractional executive, it could be a COO, a CFO, a sales officer, a commercial officer, a tech officer. I mean, there's so many different fractional executives out there. But what that person does is, to your point, they are that team leadership. They build structure, process to the team. They also mentor and coach the team. And they work with the executive team to make sure that whatever their function is doing is aligning to what the business goals are, what the strategic goals are for the company, and the vision that they're going after for that, and goals that they're going after for that particular year. And the different functions would have, obviously different tactics that they would use. So, for example, I go into companies as a fractional CMO, which means I'm obviously at that point engaged in the marketing function. So it would be looking at the pipeline, working with sales, working with the team members that are within the department and helping them grow, helping them learn new skills, helping them organize, build processes, as well as, get the different tactics that they are tasked with out the door in a timely manner, building quarterly campaigns. But if I'm going into a company as a chief commercial officer, then that alignment is a lot different. Now I am working at a higher level across VP and C-suite to really align all the commercial activities, the go-to-market activities, all the rev ops, all those things that you need to think about from operations, customer service, finance, marketing, sales. I might work with a fractional CMO. I might work with a fractional COO. But the goal is to really look at the whole commercial engine of a company and how you go out to the world through that commercial engine and get them all aligned and working. So from an agency standpoint, to your points, Megan, it's being able to align to the strategies that are set forth, doing the tactical executions, whether being on retainer to do multiple projects or being brought in at a project base It's understanding where you fit with the rest of the team so that you can accomplish your projects in a timely fashion and to their satisfaction. Did I
and that's
leave
where
anything else?
That strategist is key in that, right? And so that's where, whether it's the fractional CMO or we have strategists on our team that can augment or take some of that responsibility, it depends on where the company is and their evolution, right? And what they're looking for. It's actually, when we do have fractional CMO engagements, those statements of work are some of the hardest to explain or review compared to an agency statement of work, because it's but what are you doing? And it's well, I'm doing these things. I'm doing leadership of the team and of the agency, and I'm aligning metrics to business strategy and making recommendations. But our agency SOWs are laden with deliverables and timelines and very concrete stuff, and the statements of work for fractional CMO services are more loosey-goosey, and it's it's going to be, and I'll know better once we're in and exactly what we're doing, but these are the buckets or the categories. And then it's at the pace that your business is moving that we're able to influence, this decision-making and exactly what is happening here, so it's always interesting, when you get into those and someone first time trying to hire a fractional CMO, it can be a little bit more challenging to explain it, Denine, which I think is, I think you should talk about your business model a little bit here and how you've evolved from fractional CMO to being more of that growth advisor and more of that commercial entity that you just described. Because some of those engagements, I feel can be, have a little bit easier for organizations to understand because they have a start and an end date, right? And so it's a little bit more open and shut with a tighter defined scope. And so for an organization that's trying to figure out where to get started, fractional CMO, the lowest that we'll do it for is 90 days. We prefer the first engagement to be for at least 6 months. It takes time to get in and the rhythm, and you're a part of the team and all this stuff. Those blitzes that you can do that can provide really turbocharged, heavy-hitting insights that can create the compelling reason to go and actually try and find that fractional CMO, I think are super interesting and a great evolution of what you're doing. Do you want to share a little bit more about that?
Sure, and that's a great point. And a lot of fractionals are looking at it from that perspective as well. So I found that I was hired for 2 different reasons. I was either brought in as a fractional CMO to lead the team and work with the leadership. And to your point, that's a longer retainer type of engagement, typically a minimum of 6 months, but many, many times it could go a year and a half, 2 years, just depending on how long. And that's really for companies that need part-time help. They need leadership because they may have full-time marketing specialists or coordinators to do very specific kinds of tasks. And they need that full-time person in there because, if someone's doing social and email and all of that, that's a daily type of task that is done on a regular basis. So from that perspective, I would come in, work with the team. The other time I was brought in on a project basis or a short-term basis, a 3-month engagement, even up to 6-month engagement. And the reason why I was brought in was either to figure out what the bottleneck or stopgap constraint, whatever you want to call it, is, and then optimize it. So it would really be a strategic engagement up front, looking at all of those higher level commercial, go-to-market, revenue driving type of scenarios. Are they in the right market? Are they looking to grow to a new market? Are they looking to grow to a different audience? Are they not reaching enough of their audience? Their pipeline's not driving enough leads. There's so many different things. You could be launching a new product or service. So they would bring me in from a strategic perspective to really help them define what it is, build out a roadmap, or find the gaps or the constraint that's really holding them back, and then help them build out a roadmap to kind of break them free from that. Sometimes that leads into a fractional engagement. Sometimes it doesn't. So I really found myself, talking to clients in two different ways. And that's why I also put out there that I'm a revenue growth advisor, because a lot of times marketing really is about revenue. That's marketing's entire goal, is to drive new customers, new revenue into the business. It's sales' job to close the business, but marketing has a really defining role with that. So anything from a commercialization perspective with a company is about driving that revenue. And it is about looking at things like market share, customer lifetime value, CAC, which is, customer acquisition costs. Your average, marketing director or even marketing manager doesn't have enough overarching experience most of the time, and experience with a lot of different tools in the toolbox and frameworks and methodologies for marketing to understand how to take all these little pieces and put them together, and how you figure out where is it broken. If you don't know the bigger picture to begin with, you don't know what levers to pull, what things to look at, and how you would figure out what's actually broken or what you need.
For your revenue growth officer, Denine, I always have this vision of you as sort of like a hound dog, like sniffing around for the root cause, and then the fractional CMO is more of like orchestrating how we're going to solve this now that we know what the real challenge in front of us is. So
I think
we're
my
about
new
halfway
mascot's
through.
going to be a hound dog.
I think that's how I think about it. So we're about halfway through our episode right now. So I just want to take a pause here and tell our listeners that if you're finding value in the conversation and you know a colleague or someone else in the industry that you think could benefit, please take a beat here and share the link to the episode with them, and you guys can have a great conversation about it. And if you aren't subscribed to receive new alerts when new episodes of The Intersection drop, please make sure you take a second to sign up and make sure that you get alerted for future episodes.
So we talked about what you need to think about before you hire in a resource and the different types of resources. Now I think we should really get into what are some of those pitfalls? What are those common misconceptions? One of the things that I hear on a regular basis is everybody's a fractional now. And, you have a marketing specialist that is in between jobs, and now suddenly they're a fractional. You have an accountant, and suddenly they're a fractional CFO. So what are some of the other misconceptions that you hear?
Well, I feel a lot, and Denine, I know you've shared this with me too, that especially when people in mid-market building materials, most of them do not have a lot of expertise with marketing or history with marketing. And so when they hire a fractional CMO, they think that fractional CMO is going to do work. And while fractional CMOs do work, it is strategic work. They are not actually creating paid search campaigns or writing social posts. Maybe there's a moment in time or a specific skill set they came up in that they enjoy. So maybe they do a little bit of something, but they're there to think and to challenge the thinking of the C-suite to be more comprehensive about your marketing strategy and how you're going to market. They're not there to create stuff, they're there to help other people create better stuff, So I think that's a common misconception, is that a fractional CMO is going to administer paid search campaigns or run a social channel or do things like that.
I have run into that so many times. I talk to them ahead of time. We talk about, okay, what strategies do you need? We even go into hey, I need to solve this problem, and build out an engagement where the first quarter is really around understanding the process, building out the strategy before I even get into anything else, getting this stuff done. And what ends up happening is, you fall into the, well, this has to happen trap. And you end up just worrying about email campaigns instead of what's really holding the company back and really driving movement. And then that friction ends up, between you and the leadership and trying to prioritize on what's next. I think that's a really important misconception. So if you are going to bring in a fractional, regardless of department, you really need to think about what their role is. What are their priorities? What are they there to do? And then what you can do internally and make sure that you're not drifting from that. Is if you want to hit your target and get out of them what you hired them for, you need to give them the breadth and the space to do that.
And the support from an execution standpoint, like if you don't have the budget to execute, like to support them from an executional standpoint, it doesn't really mean anything, right?
Exactly.
Steve, I'm curious from more of a consulting.
Why bring in a fractional if you don't have a budget?
Yeah, if you don't have a budget. That's why I was saying that maybe a consultant's a better place to start, because they can even give you a better understanding, or, some of your services, Denine, that are like more defined in scope, like what does a marketing department need, and what would be the budget to support it? And are we able to do that yet or not as an organization, or what do we have to get to? But Steve, I'm curious, like from your perspective, you swim more of the world in consulting. Coffey and Co. is almost like a mini McKinsey or Bain for, technology and AI data applications and mid-market building materials, right? So you're heavy in the world of consulting. What are misconceptions there?
Well, I think one thing that we have not mentioned, to answer your question, Megan, is the importance of the CEO in this whole decision. And what I find is that more traditional, let's say, big management consulting firm relationships, oftentimes those companies are brought in to solve a situation or solve a dilemma or a problem. But depending on the size of the organization, they are there simply to be fired, right? The CEO is saying, hey, I don't want to be blamed for this overall strategic direction that could be wrong, right? So from a more, let's say, management consulting firm perspective versus a fractional CFO, we're bringing them in for the strategy to set the tone. And then our organization will go in and execute, or they will be responsible for bringing in agencies to execute. I find that larger organizations will treat a fractional in the same way, where they'll say, hey, let's bring someone in that we can blame if this goes south. So you have to navigate that. And I think that is a conversation piece around the conference room table that you are not privy to. So one of the things I think is really important is, as a fractional, and also speaking to if you're a team, right? If you're a manufacturer who's looking to bring in a fractional for a strategic problem that you have, or for something that you're wanting done, is to make sure that if you are the CEO, make sure that you are not the integration layer, right? Oftentimes in building materials, depending on the size of the organization, the CEO is the one who sits in between departments and can connect departments better than anybody else around the table. And so as a fractional, you'll come in, you won't have visibility into tribal knowledge or, nomenclature or whatever it is you need to be able to actually construct a strategy. You won't have the visibility into all that because the CEO is the one who connects all those departments. And yet you were hired by, the VP of sales to work and build this, or especially on the technology side, that's especially true. So that is oftentimes one of the big dilemmas is you may not know fully why you are there outside of just the task that's in front of you. You need to be able to discern, have those important conversations up front with the key leadership in the organization. Why am I here? Are we just dealing with surface level symptoms, or are we dealing with actual constraints? That can be awkward. It's very necessary. The manufacturer, the C-suite team, needs to understand, what are we communicating to this person, depending on the time frame. If they're going to be here for six months or a year, they're really going to get bought into the organization. So let's speed that up. If they're going to be here for 90 days, to your point, Megan, they're going to be here. We need to, buy them into the tribal knowledge really quickly, so that they understand us very well and can do more successful work. The CEO is a very important part of that. So you need to understand why you're there, and the manufacturer needs to really define, why is this person here? Why aren't we hiring a person to sit in this role for 10 years? Why are we bringing in the fractional? That's a very important piece of the conversation, and can really affect the result. So I think that's one thing. Talking about misconceptions, right? That's what I see a lot, is that the CEO is a bigger player than oftentimes the conference room table really understands. That's a key part.
I also think that you're right on there, because if you're bringing in a fractional, you really need to embed them in the organization, not just keep them at arm's length. You have to include them in your meetings and cadence so that they are acting purely on the behalf of the company. Where a consultant, when they come in, there's a specific goal and framework in mind, and you have to bring them up to speed and get them going really quickly. So I don't think a lot of companies really think about it that way.
Yeah, my biggest challenges when I've been a fractional, or we've had other people on our team who have been a fractional, have been, what you talked about, Steve. One is cutting through, you'll get involved with leadership teams that have been working together for 10, 15 years without a marketing person. And they have all this shared history of, wins and challenges and a language and a vocabulary, all their own. And then here's a discipline and a person that's coming in and disrupting, this rhythm that they've built, and they want it. They think they want it, but then do they want it? Like that cultural rub is really, really challenging. And the other thing is that the organization, if you're going to bring in an agency, you should be transparent, you should be honest, and same thing with a consultant. But if you're going to bring on a fractional, they're a member of your team. You cannot keep things from them, and the organization really has to think about, where you're able to do your best work as a fractional. You get your own email address that is the company email address. You have access to the CRM. You have access to the marketing automation if they're different. You have access to whatever internal chat function that they're using. You go to their team meetings. You go to their happy hours. You do all the things with the people as if you're a full-time member of the team, to get over some of that cultural hurdle that I mentioned. You can be a consultant with your own email address. You can be an agency with your own email address. You cannot be a fractional with your own email address. You really need to get embedded within the organization. And the organization should ask themselves, am I ready to open up this level of transparency to a relative outsider who isn't necessarily a W-2, and we don't know, we work on 90-day or 66-month contracts, am I okay with doing that? And it takes time from the organization to ramp up a fractional. You need to give them access to not just senior executives, but the rest of the team. How do you introduce them? How do you explain why they're there? And you have to make it not that it's an outsider, but you're an insider when you are placed within, or you are operating in that role within an organization.
Yeah, I feel like what you should be asking as the fractional is essentially some diagnostic questions. What business outcome needs to change? Where is that outcome currently breaking down? Is the constraint knowledge? Is it capacity? Is it authority? Is it process? Is it technology or coordination within the existing team? And then primarily, who owns the result? And then depending on the timeline, right? If it's 90 days, 6 months, 12 months, what must be measurably different 6 or 12 months from now, right? That's a little bit easier, I think, as a CMO versus let's say a fractional chief technology officer. There's direct measurables that may come from a strategic initiative that you are shaping within an organization as a CMO. But I think it's very important for the fractional to do that at the outset, is to ask those things to solve that, Megan. I think it's a very good point. Yeah.
So let's say a company brings in a fractional CMO, and they have to work with consultants and other agencies. What are those things? What are the commonalities? How do they work together? Because I personally have reached out to a lot of agencies, and Megan, you are The first person that I spoke to that owned an agency that absolutely understood the relationship between a fractional CMO and an agency, where so many other agencies see fractionals as competitors, where I see them as complements. So I don't do what they do, and they don't do what I do. And together we're stronger. And when you bring the two pieces together, you have really strong leadership and strategic guidance and process and internal understanding that you would not get otherwise. And then you have an agency that really understands the tactics, what's going to drive them, how they can be successful, how they can grow the business from that perspective, and be able to do them quickly and efficiently. And when you bring those two things together, they're just, to me, it's like magic, because you have this synergy that just flows back and forth. And Megan and I think we work together that way in all the time. I think that's what drew us together.
Yeah. I mean, like I said when we started this episode, big red flag for me is that you have a CEO leading marketing. And it's still somewhat of a flag if it's a VP of sales. It's a little bit better than a CEO, but I really want a marketer who is on the client side to be leading the agency client relationship. And so whether, to have you there to give us better direction, we still have a responsibility as an agency to be strategic, to up-level your thinking, to bring forward what we know to be true and engage in discussion and dialogue in a proactive way, to push and pull at ideas, right? But I look at a fractional CMO at the client side the same way that I would look at a full-time CMO or VP of marketing or whatever it may be, who's giving us direction. Like, I welcome that. I embrace that. It's interesting about the consultants, and this is something about building materials. Like, I've had an experience where a client had a consultant that had been in for a bit and had been producing some work and some strategic decisions that I just fundamentally did not agree with, and it was very challenging to be able to try and push back on some of this work that had been underway for like over a year, and then it was thrust at me, like, figure out what to do with this. And it's like, well, I don't know. I would kill it. I don't think that was a good use of time or energy and anything we spend on that. But it's very difficult, when you're in there and there is a mix. And you see this more in the emerging mid-market companies, I think, where there's consultants, there's fractionals, there's agencies. And I guess my advice to anyone in the world that's trying to endeavor to do something like this is like, don't be afraid to vocalize your concerns. You might have to figure it out. At the end of the day, I had to figure it out. And I did the best with what I could with where the situation was. But it wouldn't have been the choice to get there, right? I feel like the company could have made higher impact investing the dollars in different directions, But that's also sort of the benefit of the fractional side, is that you are fractional, And so you're going to get raw from a company perspective, from a CEO or whoever is engaging the person. You're going to get, I feel like, more raw, unfiltered, more direct feedback than you might if it is an FTE, where that's their only gig and they're dependent on you for everything. In the fractional world, there's the opportunity to go find someone to replace you a little bit more easily, right? And so you're willing, at least I am more willing to just be a straight shooter and say what it is, because that's not the only way that I'm feeding my family, And so I think, at least, and there's the other side where, are you getting the best? But in my opinion, you're getting the full unvarnished truth, right? And so that's a good way to think about it too.
I think there's a lot of synergies from the consulting side as well. When consultants are brought in, they're brought in to solve a problem and work on a specific project. But when that execution of that, whatever that consultant delivers, that's the perfect time to bring in a fractional. So I think there's like a real kind of like infinity loop, even between consulting, agency, full time employees within a company, and fractional executives.
Well, I think that we have certainly given our listeners a lot to think about here. So, to summarize, you've got 3,000 choices in all the different scenarios. They're not just three. It's, we've really talked about consultants, fractionals, and agencies, but then there's a million different combinations thereof. And how do you get them engaged? And when do you know what's best? So hopefully our listeners, you guys have found value in the conversation today. It's provoked some thoughts and discussions that you can bring back to your organization. If you're finding value in the content and would like to forward it to others, please do so. And also, if you're not subscribed to receive updates about when new episodes of The Intersection drop, take a minute before you leave us today and be sure to subscribe. So Denine, Steve, a pleasure as always. And that's a wrap on this episode of The Intersection.